Hello and welcome to Scuttlebutt, which is the comment response videos from now on. What I'm going to be doing is sort of there are going to be key ships comment response videos going to be coming out. They're going to be part of the program still. But if it's not a key ships video, then I'm going to do Scuttlebutt, which is going to be a roundup of various comments which I find interesting across the channel that I might have responded to, I might not have responded to, and getting into them. Now, I will apologise because normally I'm gonna do this week's edition of the Year of the Aircraft Carrier, which was going to be treaty carriers. I'll now be coming out on Wednesday, mainly because it is 2 a.m. on the Tuesday, on the 7th of May, 2024, and I only finished working on the house at 1 a.m. because a very nice friend turned up to help. And let's put it this way. They are a friendly electrician. They turned up to help with the move, and we weren't expecting them to turn up today, but they turned up at lunchtime because they had a free day and they felt like helping out on their bank holiday. And yeah, then they went away and came back again, and it was the whole day. It turned into the whole day. So I haven't managed to re-record the treaty carriers to the point at which I'm happy with it, so I thought I'd give Scuttlebutt a go. So that's what I'm doing. This is going to be Scuttlebutt. And let's start off with the first thing I should probably do. Okay, I have got a proper cover page, etc., but it's back again. People not sure what Iron Brew is, so let me explain. Because there's two things. Either people think this is an alcoholic drink, and it isn't. Iron Brew is a soft drink. It's basically a Scottish version of cola. Or they think my personality requires me to be drunk. I am sorry to inform you, I am a non-alcoholic. I don't drink alcohol. And every time this comes up, I end up explaining the same story, the same part of my family history. My father was a wonderful naval architect and a pretty good father when he was sober. Unfortunately, when he wasn't, well, that would explain why at certain ages my memory of him, and certainly my last memory of him for about 10 years, from about the age of 15 onwards, was of me holding him up against a wall and telling him if he hit anyone else in the family again, I would break every bone in his body. I was 15 at the time, and I'd come home and found him attacking my mum and sister. I was not happy. It was not my proudest moment. I would prefer not to have that experience in my family history. I'd prefer not to have that experience at all. I'd prefer to have found better words to say at the time. Looking back, I would have still done the same thing, but I would have preferred better words. But those were the words I said at the time. Those are the words I live with. And we did reproach. As I've tried to say, 10 years later he came back, he apologised. He and my mum, of course, were divorced by that point and all things were better, but we were together again as a family, and he was very helpful and very kind, and he was the good part of him as a dad when he wasn't drinking. But because of that experience, despite the fact that I come from a family which is rich in alcohol history, which really does love the whiskey, love all the craft beers, etc., that my family's had breweries, wineries, vineyards, whiskey distilleries, all sorts of things in their history, I don't drink. I will never drink. Because of that. Principally, it's enhanced cowardism. I worry what I'd be like if I was drunk, so I don't drink because I don't risk it, in case I have that in me. I don't think I do. That doesn't seem to be part of my natural inclination. My natural inclination is only to do towards violence when I'm protecting others. Myself, people have thrown punches at me and I just don't react. I'll block and that's it. No. But throw a punch at someone smaller, throw a punch at a family member throw a punch at a friend, then I'll react. So that gives me an instinct that, maybe I wouldn't be the same as him, but I don't feel like testing that. I don't want to test that. I have no inclination to test it. So, I am me, and this is me sober. And what's fun is that these questions come up so often on this channel, so I think people must really be unused to people having this level of energy and this level of enthusiasm, or being as random as I can be, sober, which I find sad. Does that mean you can only truly be yourself with the false, courage of alcohol? Does that mean you have to restrain yourself? You cannot be the true you? That's sad. I love my books. I love naval history. I love talking with everyone, even the people who annoy me by asking questions over and over again and not listening to my answers, as if they're just sort of asking the question until I say a magic phrase which they've been waiting for, and I'm going, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm trying to give you my answer. If it doesn't use the phrase you're expecting, I'm sorry, but those are my words. You're expecting me to use the words of others, I presume. And I can usually work them out, because at a certain point I will work out, oh, they're looking for the phrase of Andrew Lambert or Norman Freeman. And how do I test that? I use the phrase of Andrew Lambert or Norman Freeman, and I watch their comment response. In which case, that's fine. But you've just wasted my time looking for me to regurgitate something which you've already read. That's kind of a waste of both our times. Sorry. It is. I'm not sure people are going to agree with me on that one, but that seems to me a waste of our times. Because if you're asking me a question, I presume you'd want my opinion rather than me to regurgitate someone else's opinion. Or maybe I'm confused. Please elaborate below. If I'm confused, I'm confused. But yes, Scuttlebutt. It's going to be monthly, okay? There'll be monthly roundups, and as you can already tell, I'm doing Wednesdays as a bit of a random videos. Usually this will be on a Wednesday, but it's, today, as I said, it's on a Tuesday. But they're not going to be immune, they're still going to have the shameless book plug. Because, as you all know, whilst I thank you very much for supporting the channel, and thank you for everyone who likes, shares, subscribes, joins the channel as a member or as a patron, all these things, you were really helping it grow and supporting it, and I really love that, because it's a key part of my work as a public-facing historian, I've decided, is going to be doing YouTube, and I believe in being a public-facing historian. I fundamentally believe history is not about talking in ivory towers or just talking between academics. You've got to expand out, and I know most academics are on that side of the spectrum. The vast majority I've worked with in my career are very much keen on talking out with people, but people do it to varying degrees, and usually when you call yourself a public-facing historian, that means it's your primary thing, your primary focus, and that's what I'm believing in. But if I want, as I've explained before, if I want the academic position, permanent post, which comes with the academic pension, which, let's be honest, I wouldn't mind having a pension when I'm older. I'd like to be able to work for fun when I'm in my 70s, 80s, and 90s, rather than have to work. I think we're all fairly agreed on that. I need to get a permanent post. Which means I need to sell books, because, let's be honest, whilst journal articles are great, they take forever to get through to publication. So books are it. And this is the book I have out. So, without much further ado, let's get into some of the interesting discussions I've had recently. Japanese doctrine discussions have come up. And this was really interesting, because pretty much it's a very well thought out comment, and it's a very interesting comment. I disagree with some of the phraseology, but that was more with me looking at it going, I think you're using that phrase to discuss that phrase. And I can understand why. It could well be just a difference of lexicons in approach, so I would point that out. It's very well worded. It's a very interesting comment. But broadly speaking, it was the idea of that I was too Mahanian in my approach to Japanese strategy. That's an interesting thing. I'm the person who spends their entire life pretty much going the Kantai-Kessen was not the focus of the Japanese naval doctrine and was only one of many strategies they used. So I find it fun when I'm accused of being too Mahanian in my approach and too Western in my approach to Japanese naval strategy. I spend a lot of my time trying to research and read a lot of the Japanese naval doctrines as they wrote them. But I can understand where that came from in the concept of building fleets for the Battle of Midway. Because when you're looking at Kantai-Kessen, and you're looking at specifically as it's applied to the Americans, the Japanese are looking at it from a Mahanian angle. Why? Because they presume the Americans are going to be looking at it from a Mahanian angle. The interesting thing is, my good friend Benjamin Armstrong wrote a great book about what would Mahan do about how Mahan ran the Pacific War and those sort of things. And it's a really good read. And it actually shows the US Navy didn't really do it according to Mahan strictly. But the Japanese thought the US would, because Mahan was their theorist. It's like when you look at the British, their strategies for fighting the British. They are focusing on corvette. And that's a very interesting thing. I know I haven't covered this before too much, but the Japanese strategy around having big gun battleships, it's partially to do with the Americans for maybe Kantai-Kessen. Maybe, if it comes to that, if the Americans come through the attrition phase and all the other phases to get to the point at which Kantai-Kessen is a sensible option, then it would be part of it. But it's also to do with the countering the British, because they realise what the British will want to do is blockade, because that's what the British always want to do. But to enforce a blockade, you're going to need to have a fleet out there. If the Japanese theory is if they have massive battleships, which are so big and powerful, the Royal Navy has to concentrate the most of its military strength out there on a long-term basis to counter those ships, that will put Britain in an untenable position because of Italy and later on Germany and the other issues Britain has to deal with around the world. It's not a risk fleet strategy, because it's not about fighting or directly competing. It's about having a strong enough ships that Britain has to worry about it. Because if you think that they're building these huge 18-inch gun battleships, huge ships, powerful ships, what's Britain got? Britain hasn't got anything equivalently at this point. Now, the thing is, Britain would have to build something equivalent to it. That's something they'd leave at the time. But also, the other interesting thing with that scenario is you have to think about the British have already got a very advanced, very obsessive ideas about striking fleets in harbour. Including the fact that they are the ones who developed the torpedo with the tension wire to belly flop the torpedo, and the only ones who have that. So it's a really interesting scenario that basically the Japanese idea is to make it very expensive for the British to have to carry out this kind of operation long term. And the British scenario is, we ain't going to have to leave battleships there long term because we're going to sink them where they're sitting in harbour. Would it have worked? Would it not have worked? That's entirely up for the wargamers to try and work through, because let's be honest, it never happened. But it's fun. It's fun. And it's interesting. So the Japanese were expecting the British to adopt a Corbettian strategy, and the Americans to adopt a Mahanian strategy. But also I would point out that Mahan wasn't entirely battle-focused, so you have to realise there is more to Mahan than just the major battles and decisive battles. And Corbett is not just operations and what you can do with sea control focused. He also covers battles. So again, you have to realise Mahan is more than just what he's often marketed as. And I'm sure this commentator did realise that. And the Japanese are designing their strategy in relation to what they think the American strategy is going to be. So some Mahan is going to be coming from their own learning, but their own strategists they have a very good strategist, and I'm planning on doing a video about one of them soon as we've got all the information translated and fully digested. But The Mahan is also leaking into their strategy because that's their perception of what their opponent's going to do. Just like Corbett leaks into their strategies for fighting the British because they think that's what the British are going to do. Which actually does set us up for the whole discussion at the end of this video, but we'll leave that to one side. Then we have the Deterrence. And this was some very interesting things here about the values of small ships and commitment and clear signalling, the importance of diplomats. And I would say the musings on the Deterrence video was very much for me around the Deterrence. It was around the ideas of Deterrence. And you need to be strong with your signalling, but also you need to understand what the values of various ships are. A patrol vessel, a vessel like HMS Endurance, etc., or even a diplomat doing a diplomatic visit, they're all symbols of the fleet behind them. Put another way, HMS Endurance in the Falklands. If the Royal Navy hadn't had the CVA-01 cancellation and the carrier decision, but had still withdrawn Endurance, there is a good chance the Argentinians do not go for the Falklands. Why? Because there is strength behind it. It's when they think there's no strength behind it and the British aren't interested, those two things line up at the same time, that they go for the Falklands. And combine that with mixed messages coming from the diplomats and the government because of them trying to sort of manage the situation, but not actually coordinating or communicating or actually agreeing on what they were going to do, and you have the mess. The Falklands is a classic case study in bad conflict management and incredibly bad signalling and deterrence. It's a massive expense, a massive cost in lives, and it's mostly because people didn't communicate properly internally in the British government. And didn't properly weigh the cost of things. Deterrence is always cheaper than war. There is this old phrase, in times of peace, prepare for war. Sivi pacem para bellum. It's a lovely phrase. It could also be written as, well, another phrase. Those who seek peace must prepare for war. Because that's the deterrence phrase. If you want peace, be prepared for war so people don't want to fight you, so you'll have peace. Again, I refer you to the walk softly and carry a big stick. Now, as I work through that phraseology in this video, make sure the stick is large and slung over your body so your hands are free. Because if you have the stick in your hands, that can look too dangerous. So the stick needs to be big and visible, but just dangling on your back. Okay? That's the same with armed forces if you want peace. You have to have a very big stick that's clearly visible. Especially if you're trying it by conventional deterrence. Even strategic deterrence needs to extent to be visible as well as invisible. It needs to be invisible in terms of your ability to intercept, to destroy it, intercede it before it can be used, but it needs to be visible in terms of its constantness and constant presence. So it's always part of the equation. Then we get the tracer. Not so bad to look at. Many people are upset with me over this. Here is the thing. The problem I have with the tracer is I can see it as the tracker and I can see it as the trader. And that is a lovely looking aircraft. And then I have to see it as the tracer with the carbuncle on its back. Okay? That's it. It's an entire carbuncle on its back. That's my view. There were also some comments in that video which I could have pulled out for being not quite in the spirit of things. There were some people who were very eager to defend me against others, and thank you for that. It's always kind of you. I really do appreciate the support of everyone on this channel. But saying that, I can stick up for myself if I feel so inclined. If I feel people are worthwhile my time having the argument with, I will have the argument with. If I look at a comment and it's just one of the various ones about me, which are rude, honestly, I just move on. And how can I do that? Well, I've been doing this for a few years now, but more importantly, I'm 37 years old. All the people who I love and respect and know respect me, work with me, and whilst I'm sure they find me annoying on occasion, and I'm sure I'm not a perfect being in any way, shape, or form, seem to be quite tolerant of my presence. People who I don't know, who I've never met, who are using random names on the internet, who turn up once to comment and say nasty things about me, are not people whose opinions I care for, one way or the other. Now, when it comes to the people who turn up regularly on the channel and chat away, it's gonna sound strange, but it has developed into sort of a mentality in my mind of them being students, of how I approach my students. In that, no, wouldn't say I'm your friend, because we haven't had that level of interaction. But like my students, I pay attention. I try and listen and check they're okay, and if they're having a hard time, I want to send them, if I do know them on Discord or anything like that, they're in brew ships, I will say something like, I hope you're doing well, I hope things are getting better for you. Because again, that's how we treat our students. It's a form of respect, you know. I've never been one of the lecturers who's sought to make friends with all their students or calls them their family. They're like my children. No. That's not my purpose, though. And yes, there are students who've gone on to become friends. But that's the exception, not the rule. Most of them are students. I have great respect for them, but I'm there to impart knowledge and answer their questions. If they ask me the questions and listen and are respectful in their way they treat me, I'm going to be very respectful back. And I'm going to care about them from the point of view of they're fellow human beings. A basic level of caring about each other goes a long way. It also goes a long way in deterrence, by the way. A basic level of caring about other countries and the peoples of other countries goes a long way in conflict management. Because if you've got a track record of being there when things go wrong, then when things go wrong for you, or things could potentially go wrong for you, you'll suddenly find you have a lot of friends. Of people who would prefer things didn't go wrong for you. Countries don't have friends, they have interests. But if you've shown yourself to be someone who always considers it in your interest to be helpful when you can, to be considerate when you can, you tend to find others apply the same policy. American light carriers. Now, this was a fun one. Odes to the virtues of small carriers. Oh, good lord. Okay, there were several people who thought they owned me on this one by pointing to escort carriers in the interwar period, and in escort carriers in World War II, I mean. And that was funny, but most funny was when I was sort of thinking about Ranger and Wasp, which are the US attempts to get a large carrier group of nearly 100 aircraft on a 15,000-ton hull. The Americans really do not want small carriers because they want large air groups. Why do they want large air groups? Because it fits their doctrine. They operate smaller carriers in World War II because they need to massively grow the reach and capability of their air power, not because they want them. Some people turn around saying that, well, the LHDs, the modern ones, are small carriers. They are 40,000 plus tons. They're not small carriers. Anyone else in the world, any other navy in the world, you'd be talking about a carrier. If you're talking about a small vessel, you're talking 20,000 tons, not 40,000 tons. The problem is for the Americans is they operate fleet carriers and light fleet carriers. Or rather, super carriers and light fleet carriers. Everyone else in the world operates fleet carriers, light fleet carriers, or baby carriers, small carriers. The Americans don't. They don't operate the teeny ones, and they don't operate fleet carriers. They have super carriers, and they have light fleet carriers. And their light fleet carriers, LHDs, really aren't carriers. They are aviation ships from the point of view of amphibious warfare, but their purpose is the carrier version is aviation in terms of amphibious warfare support, not carrier role. Yes, I know there are talks about them being used as F-35B carriers and carrying all the systems, but they don't have airborne early warning for them. They don't have the other systems you need to make them into a fully operational carrier. They are literally just, we've dumped a load of our normal fighters on here and we're going to call it a carrier for the purposes of this operation because it gives us an extra hull in the water doing that mission. So, yeah, the Americans don't like beta small carriers. And guess what? There's a good reason they don't. Because their doctrine is always about maximising strike potential and maximising reach of air group, which means you need the biggest flight deck and biggest hangar possible. Because you want to be able to land aircraft, rearm them on the deck, and launch them on the set without having to send them down the hangar. You want to store as many aircraft as you can in the hangar so you can have the most aircraft to launch. And that's a good thing. Because it fits American doctrine to a T. So yes. Please, please. Go look at the American Doctrine and Naval Aviation Doctrine video. Have a look at that. I can see why some people maybe took this from this short generated from an old live. But even then, I didn't see it as a major problem saying the US Navy doesn't like light carriers. They don't like small carriers. Actually, it was they don't like small carriers. That was the phrase I used. They used them. Doesn't mean they like them. I used these small pots from McDonald's for barbecue sauce. I'd really prefer a larger pot. Or it's this option, or you get those little white paper cups that you just pour into, and they're even smaller. For goodness sake, McDonald's. A decent-sized barbecue sauce pot. All we are, something you can actually stick a chicken nugget into without it scraping the sides the whole time. So you can decently cover the nugget. I know, it's a first world problem. I know it is, but it's just, you know, it's the principle of the thing. And then we have this. Admiral Fisher no longer replaces Admiral Battenberg as First Sea Lord. Now, I know in past comment response videos I have read out comments. And Graham and I actually... Graham came along to brew ships. He turned up and I commented that he was a big fan of Fisher. And I wasn't sure what to call such a big fan of Fisher. And my basis was the sheer length of comments, really. These are all from Graham. I didn't want to have the discussion, though, in brew ships. Because I felt I should do a proper comment response to this because of the sheer length of the comment. And also because of quite how much information and quite how much detail he went into. And these are massive comments. They truly are. Broadly speaking, though, there are some small issues with them. Now, basically, the justification of Graham's argument, as I can see it from what he's written here, so it might not be his intention, and I always do say that, you know, there's what you intend in your think in your mind, what you write, and then what others read when they read what you write. Basically, his view is Fisher could have more coherently argued with the cabinet and could have made a stronger case for adopting a Courbetian strategy, which he does refer to as the natural strategy of Britain. And historically, he's not wrong. But the trouble is not Fisher in this period. Fisher had managed to muck this up already. You see, the Entente Cordiale starts in 1904. It's signed while Admiral Wilson is First Sea Lord, just before Fisher becomes First Sea Lord. And the problem is the army has been reformed for many years, since the Boer War, and part of their reforms was setting up an army general staff. And the problem you have is that Wilson and Fisher are both great naval men. They're great history of naval men. In the model of history. They don't like to tell anyone their plans, they just say, "Trust me, Minister." Or they talk off the cuff. And that has been a great history in the Royal Navy. But the world had changed. The world had changed severely. And it's only really Battenberg who realises in the Royal Navy when he's Second Sea Lord. Because with the army forming the army staff, instead of them going, "Trust me, bro, I'm an admiral and I know what I'm talking about," what they did was they started producing papers. Confidential papers. So, whilst the Royal Navy would point to, "Oh, Corbett, read his book, you'll understand the history of strategy," almost every month from the time they formed the staff onwards, the general staff are producing papers, producing confident documents, producing briefings, which are circulated. So here I am as an MP. I have an admiral in a dinner who's going, "Oh, don't worry, we have a plan. I can't tell you it, but we have a plan." On the other side, I have, from the army, a confidential document I can read and comment on. One makes me feel like a trusted participant. One makes me feel like a little kid. One also makes me worried they don't really have a plan. The problem for the Navy is that by the time you get to 1914, the Army's been doing that, as said, since the reforms of the staff, which took place in 1907 as the Imperial General Staff, but the Army Staff had actually started earlier. And so what you have is, by 1907 and from that onwards, not just documents going to British governments and British politicians, but politicians and colonial officials around the empire, standardizing the armies, providing this documentary evidence, providing this support. And the Navy wasn't doing it. The Navy was forming the Dominions, the Navy was taking part in the conferences, but the Navy was not doing the staff work. Not until Battenberg set up the staff as Second Sea Lord and confirmed it as First Sea Lord. Now, why am I making this point? Because the thing was, in 1914, no one could change the government's position, not even Fisher standing in there, and anyone who believes anyone could change it is not reading history. They are hoping. No one could change the plans. Because the army had been briefing their plan, as badly thought through as it was, that it was mostly just a set of train and ferry timetables. But it was a little bit more than that. There was tables and distributions and logistics, and there was all sorts of lovely words, and it had been reproduced many, many times in many different ways. Had been drumming that into the politicians of the empire, with no opposition, for over a decade, at various levels, including the full empire for at least 7 years by 1914. In contrast, the Navy had been starting to produce their documents against much resistance from admirals like Fisher and Beresford. A lot of the older admirals had resisted it. merely started documents coming out in 1912. That means not just Churchill, but every single politician in that room, in the War Cabinet, had been briefed many times about the Army's strategy and had heard nothing from the Navy. And you could stand up and rant and say, trust me, bro, and I'm a great admiral at this point, but you are not going to get anywhere. You just aren't. I agree. If Fisher had been with Andrew Lambert, and if Fisher had been advised in the cabinet as an advisor of some kind, they would probably perform better in their deterrence role. However, there is no way the Army's not sent to there in 1914. The weight sent to France in 1914, the weight of evidence had just been mounted up. It might not be good evidence, but it had been restated so many times, it had become a solid corpus of it. And the person who was first Sea Lord for the longest, when this was the case, was Fisher himself. Fisher was first Sea Lord from 1904 to 1910. The reports, the generation, the creation of this was happening in front of him. The time to act would have been 1904. The time to act would have been 1907, maybe. But he didn't. Because he believed in the traditional methodologies of the Navy to influence politics, because he believed in the traditional approach to seafaring, and because he actually truly believed the only way to keep war plans secure was to have them only in his own head. Probably the case. But the fact is, in the 1900s, that is no longer acceptable. Having war plans saying they're secure because they're in my head and no one else has them, that is no longer something that is acceptable. It just doesn't work like that. Now, I'm not going to get into some of the arguments Graham made about Spangenberg. I'm believing they are motivated by his forthright defense of Fisher, and feeling that I'm perhaps a bit harsh on Fisher. As I've said many times, Fisher is a very good admiral and he comes up with the Dreadnought, but he's not, well, rather he gets the Dreadnought built and he does a lot for the naval service. He does a lot for it. But I think his position on the staff, his position on sharing his plans, and I really do think his position, his leadership in World War I, are not his best aspects. And the way he acts in this scenario is really not a good aspect. You have to accept people as they are. We want to have heroes. And this is why I'm trying to be as respectful as I am, because, as Graham puts it, he is an admirer of Lord Fisher. He also accused me of not having read Julian Corbett, but we'll leave that to one side. I'm afraid if that's your opening line, that's not exactly a positive response for a British naval historian. I think the basic criteria for being one in the UK is having at least read Corbett, and probably Rogers, and Lambert. But leaving that all to one side, the fact is the Baltic Plan was a terrible plan from the get-go. Yes, you could theoretically do it, but you're going to have to take so many losses to do it. Is it sensible? Is it viable? And is it really the British war plan? Because, actually, if you look at Corbett doesn't like the Baltic Plan. Why? Well, the same reason as some suggestions about if the Imperial Japanese Navy joined with the Royal Navy in 1940, the Royal Navy could somehow resupply Russia through the Baltic. You are literally driving a fleet into the area which is closest and most proximus to Germany, to their U-boats, to their minefields, and their torpedo boats. You are driving into an area which they are strongest in, and their light forces are strongest in, and they have defences. Narrow waters where you have restricted areas of manoeuvre. It's not sensible. Now, I know Fisher had plans. I know that's what Courageous, Glorious, and Furious were. But I don't agree with them, either, as a sensible thing. The first thing I learnt when I became a historian and when I decided I was really going to push into it and do it professionally is there have to be no sacred cows. I joke about tribals, battles, and darings being mine, but they really aren't. I will accept criticism of them. I've made criticism myself of the designs. And Fisher is no exception to this. I would say also that for the Baltic plan to succeed, a lot of things would have had to change. I.e., even though I'm saying it's stupid, even though I'm fairly sure Corbett, from my readings of him, felt it was ill-advised, that killer phrase of British civil servants, it is possible to have done it with the technology at the time, but not in the way that Fisher was intending to do it. And the idea of going in there, finding an army from Russia and landing them, is providing that the army, that of course the Russian army doesn't do a Duke of Parma and be in the wrong place for your fleet. Of course, there's always the scenario of the British Expeditionary Force and what it should really have been used for, but let's be honest again, there's a small problem. It's the same problem the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force have found in the run-up to World War II, when the Royal Air Force presents their plan for what they want to do with the Royal Navy's carriers, and they haven't included the Royal Navy in it, or any judgment of the Royal Navy, and that's basically, we want to use them to move all aircraft to the Far East in case of war with Japan, and then they can come back for the aircraft for the Fleet Air Arm. And that basically is a very big problem. And one of the reasons which leads to the Inskip Award. It's not the whole RAF who thinks that. Its trouble is it's just enough of them and enough of a presentation that it loses them control of the Fleet Air Arm, basically. That and many other things, of course, add up. But that was a significant oh my moment. And it's the same with the BEF should accept to be used as a missile or projectile to be fired by the British Army. Well, have you checked what their strategy and plan is? If their strategy and plan doesn't agree with you, why are you not convincing them? Why have you not joined up with them? Why are you presuming you're going to dictate to the other service? Yes, you might be the senior service, but that's not how it works in reality, is it? At that level, it's politics, it's communication, it's building alliances and friendships, and it's getting them to work together, which is another reason why you need your own staff, so your staff can interface with their staff, and a common plan can be drawn up. It's not good enough to have a book, a naval history book to point to and go, there's the British way of war, let's go do it. You actually have to have a doctrine, a plan, a strategy written up that people can read, assess, and follow, critique, change, debate. And that's ultimately the problem for the Royal Navy. I know it's not popular to say it, but the reason why the 1914 strategy of the British government is so terrible is because the service which had traditionally led British defence and operations had abrogated its role because it failed to move with the times and recognise that the methodologies of communication were different. That they didn't have days or weeks to interface with governments when things happened. They had to have it ready to go beforehand because the speed of war was a little bit faster than it used to be. And that is on the leaders of the Navy. That is their fault. It's their job. And the leader for a large chunk of that period is a guy called Admiral Fisher. Now, that's my main points. My view is, as said, no one could change 1914's decision making because no one could change it at the time. It was too deep. It was too ingrained. It was too much part of the accepted thought process. These are some very, very passionate, very historically filled comments, and there are points in them I agree with and points I disagree with. They're worth reading. Even with the quip telling me to go and read Corbett. Which I'm sure was just a joke. But, yeah. Debate and respectful discussion is what this channel is about. It truly is. And I hope I've been respectful in my response. I've tried to be. I do make jokes, though, which can occasionally come off as disrespectful and they're not intended. It's just my style, for want of a better phrase. If we refer back to the other thing of the accusation of being drunk, no. The thing is, if I'm in new lecturing mode, I'm wearing a suit, tie, and I'm giving a lecture, yes, the jokes are one way. But I'm not. The videos and the YouTube channel is run from my home. It's run from my personal office. It's me in a t-shirt and flat cap and hoodie fleece, sitting in my back garden talking away, answering questions. So it's professional, but it's also relaxed professional. So I make a few more jokes, probably than I would when I'm lecturing. And I probably take a few more risks with the jokes than I would when I'm lecturing again. Although it's still a little cousin friendly. And that is another scenario of this. I always try and keep it a little cousin friendly. Because that matters to me. Because I don't just want my little cousins to be able to watch this. I want my little cousins to be able to recommend this to their friends. Their friends watch it and none of their parents get upset and, call family because of bad language. I don't mind getting the calls of, why are you saying this? This is not true historically, and having the historical debate and the... Let's put it this way. Occasionally it's agree to disagree. Sometimes it's... But I'm sure I watched a documentary which said, yeah, don't worry about that. Do you want to go read this book? It's really cool. You get a lot of that. And I'd say, carrying on with this, one of the things I've noticed with a lot of the comments coming around this month, is a lot of them come from the scenario of the narrative of history. If we consider this, a lot of narrative through naval history is that it's the army succeeds, the Navy gets ignored. Well, the Navy gets ignored because they haven't spoken up. They haven't made their case. And you can say they can have big personalities in the room, and they haven't. I've said this and I say this again until I'm blue in the face. It's the Navy's fault. And yeah, to an extent, I also rest on Battenberg as well as Fisher, but Battenberg at least was doing something about it. He'd made the staff when he was Second Sea Lord. He'd continued to promote the staff and get them publishing and get them working as First Sea Lord. The trouble is, by that point, they are starting to maybe get a smidge up the mountain. But there's a huge mountain they have to climb because the staff from the army had been... Well, they'd A, had a staff course, which had helped prepare them. B, They mostly had a lot more social connections than most of the naval officers, which always helped with getting stuff into the House of Lords. And see, more importantly, they've been doing it for a lot longer by this point. And the thing is, the other army advantage is this. They might be posted to India, they might go off around the Empire, but then they can be posted to UK for years. They might never leave the UK. They might go from base to base, unit, regiment to regiment in the UK. It's far easier to maintain relationships and discussions when you're on land postings, or and especially when you're in the same country. When your officers leave to go off to sea and they have to hand over, well, those relationships have to start again. Those relationships have to begin again. So whereas with the army, you probably retain quite easy contact with that person you built up the good relationship with, even when they've moved on and you have to have a relationship with someone else, they can assist with that relationship. With the Navy, the person has probably gone off to sea. And communication with them will be delayed, will be stilted, will be rare. And you've got a new contact who's this new person who's newly doing the role. The Royal Navy had learned its lesson by World War II. You can argue that a lot of the better strategy of World War II of the British government in terms of naval policy is thanks to the Navy having learned its lesson and not repeated the same mistake, and have kept going for 20 odd years. However, you can also argue that a lot of the decisions made, like Churchill's decisions on carriers and capital ships, and other decisions when it came to fleet deployments, are based on the fact that they hadn't managed to make a significant enough dent in that generation of politicians which Churchill belonged to, which had started prior to World War I and had started off their careers being exposed to the army thinking. Because let's be honest, moving a battleship and an old unmodernized battle cruiser to the Far East as a deterrence force, that's an unbalanced formation. That's not a modern task grouping at all. That's not a sensible positioning either, because you're basically positioning them straight towards the front line and limiting their room for manoeuvre, which is the full advantage of sea power. It's entirely about the image. It's kind of like sending a brigade of Canadians to Hong Kong. It's classic army garrisoning deterrence, not naval deterrence. Naval deterrence was having HMS Liverpool pick the Asamaru off the coast of Japan in January 1940. That was naval deterrence. When you pluck a merchant ship off their coast without them being able to stop you at all, and demonstrate just what you can do to their economic situation if you want to. Doesn't matter what happened afterwards. Doesn't matter what the political fallout or discussions of it was. It was entirely about the deterrence effect. So, today's question is, what do you think of Scuttlebutt? What do you think of it? What have we got coming up? Treaty Carriers tomorrow. Hope you're going to enjoy that. Well, hope you will enjoy it. It'll be recorded this evening, he says on the 7th. Because I'm going to spend most of the day with Dr. Dan doing more moving of the house. We're getting stuff out of the attic. We might have more support than just Dan. I will hopefully feed him. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed.